Hi my lovelies, welcome back to my channel, and I'm just gonna say before I start today, this case, you asked for it. I resisted for quite a long time. I've become obsessed by it and it's going to be very long. In fact, there's no way I'm going to be able to get this done in one session because you're not going to have the time to spend watching it in one go. So I'm going to break it into two because it is extensive. And I really do mean that. It is absolutely extensive. And as I say, when I deep dive huge cases, I may not get everything correct. And some of you will have completely different opinions to me. And actually in this one, I'm not necessarily even trying to conclude an opinion. I'm trying to give you all the information that has been garnered from a billion different sources and from documentaries and from dramas so that I could really engage in what happened in the Menendez brothers case. And it has been challenging. I have wanted to make it ordered so that hopefully you will get a great oversight of the case. And like I have said, there may be some things that are imperfect. And if that's the case, please do educate me, leave a comment below, because I genuinely find it so helpful when you individuals come to me and say, hey Emma, you got this right, you got this wrong. I, sadly, am not Yoda. Although, I would like to be Yoda, with respect. I think Yoda had a very long life. I digress. Also, before I kick off with today's true crime video, for those of you who are following me on YouTube membership and also on Patreon, I hope you're enjoying all your full-length videos that you're getting there. I am starting to record more and more and more that I'm going to be putting out on those channels. But guys, if you didn't support me there, I wouldn't be able to do this, and I wouldn't be able to spend the amount of time that I do researching cases and maintaining this channel. Without you, there is no channel, and I just want to say a massive thank you to you. And the same to people who come back regularly and watch. If you're new to my channel, I release my content twice weekly here and then once behind my other walls on YouTube membership and Patreon, and I've been doing that for quite a long time, and will be doing that for the rest of my natural life. So should you want to subscribe here, why don't you? If you give me a like, apparently that's really helpful for the algorithm. My young kids tell me that that's the case anyway, so please give me a like with all that in mind. So let's talk about the Menendez case, the infamous Menendez case, in fact. First of all, let's look at the background of who they were born to, essentially. So Jose Menendez was born in Havana in Cuba in 1944. His father was a football player and his father also owned an accounting firm. His mother was actually a star swimmer. She was also a member of the country's Sports Hall of Fame. So you can imagine at that point in Cuba, the family was middle class. They were doing very well. And clearly political climates change in that country. But nonetheless, at this point, things are going well. He had two older sisters, a girl called Terry and Marta. In Cuba, apparently Jose was spoiled by his mother. I guess the fact that he had two older sisters and he's the baby of the family and he's a boy, maybe the mother had more of an inclination to treat him like a special little boy. And unfortunately, that indulgence wasn't something that worked well for him. And apparently he developed quite a bad reputation. So Alicia Hertz, who's a family neighbor, they said he was the only boy and basically his mother just adored him and very much emphasized his male traits and his male image. And they said that they felt that that contributed to him becoming a little bit of a bully. He became a little bit of a monster to the parents. It was hard to control him. So clearly from the onset, Jose is a handful, shall we say, and is problematic to control when it comes down to his behavior. That said, lots of children, when they're young and indulged and maybe have opportunities and privileges that lots of us don't, may be a little bit precocious in that way. It doesn't mean that he really was some kind of true monster as a child, but maybe there was something about his personality that even back then just stood out to people who knew him. Now, as I said, political situations in Cuba were really spiraling. Things were changing. So when Fidel Castro seized power, that was in 1959, this is after the Cuban Revolution, Jose's parents decided that they wanted to send him to the US to escape the political climate. Essentially, I imagine they wanted him to have a better opportunity, a better life. And I guess that for so many people, even today, Even with all the problems in the Western world, a lot of people look at the USA as the land of opportunity, the American dream, the fact that you can go there and succeed. And I know that there'll be some people who say, well, that just isn't true these days. I would still argue that when you think about entrepreneurship, when you think about possibilities, when you think about a world where there are things out there that you would not necessarily get the opportunity to try in other places in the world, America certainly still stands out. And in my opinion, when I've been to America, I've certainly felt the energy. And I guess that when you're in Cuba and you've got a son and you're thinking to yourself, I want him to make something in this world, America at that point in time felt safer and it felt a better place for him to go. But with respect, when he went, he was penniless. So he moved to Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and he lived at this point in a cousin's loft. Bear in mind as well, he didn't even speak English, and I think that must have been really disconcerting, very isolating and abandoning. If you don't speak the language somewhere, you just have that barrier, and it's really challenging. And it also speaks potentially of a level of determination and ambition in Jose, that he wanted a better life and he was willing to work real hard at doing that, and he did. So he had to learn the language, also he had to maintain his grades at school, which he did. Now, like his mother, one of the things that Jose was great at was swimming. He actually went ahead and earned an athletics scholarship to Southern Illinois University. In the UK, we now pay fees for university. Back when I was at university, you were actually given grants and things were paid for because, you know, as a working class girl, it meant that I could actually go to university, whereas these days it just feels like it's run like a business. And I know that in America it's very similar. It's incredibly expensive. In fact, you're paying off your student loan for the rest of your lives sometimes. So to win a scholarship is everything because obviously it reduces that burden financially, and he must have stood out effectively to do that. Now, as a freshman, he met Mary Louise Anderson. She's known as Kitty. So you will have watched documentaries or read books or seen documentaries on the Menendez case, and Kitty is the Menendez brothers' mother's. So even though she's called Mary Louise, that's her known name, Kitty. She was 2 years older than him, so she had a few years on him. Although, to be honest, his family weren't really happy with the fact that they were in a relationship because they felt it moved really, really fast. And it did, with respect, because Jose married Kitty in 1963 and he was 19 at the time. She's obviously 21, but that is pretty young. Saying that, they did stay together until ultimately they died. So the relationship, though without doubt imperfect, did stand the test of time. The couple then moved to New York City. Now, Jose at this point transferred to Queens College, and the reason for that is he wanted to pursue an accounting degree. There was absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Jose is one smart cookie and, like I noted, very, very determined. Now, on the 10th of January 1968, the couple's first son, Joseph Lyle, was born in New York. At this point, Kitty, who was teaching at the time, she quit her job because that was very much a common practice. My own mother, when she had us as children, even though she earned more than my father in her job, quit her work to bring us up. That's what a lot of people did back in the days of housewives. So she essentially leaves her career to look after the children. And then the family at this point moved to New Jersey. Then on the 27th of November 1970, Erik Menendez was born in Gloucester Township. So now there are two sons, and the family lived in Hopewell Township, and both of the brothers, well, they were given a lot of privileges. There was a lot of wealth in the family. They attended the prestigious Princeton Day School. So when you think about Jose, he has really escalated, hasn't he, ambition-wise? We're talking about an individual who came penniless, and he is now sending his children to a really prestigious school. Now, one of the things that happened with Jose's career is he initially picks up his first professional job at the Coopers and Lybrand accounting firm. Now, one of his clients, Lyons Container Services, which is in Illinois, they were absolutely blown away with his work. So they actually hired him to become its controller. Now, we can all agree that if you work in accounting and somebody you note is brilliant, shall we say, at saving money or being very effective over managing systems, it's going to be attractive because great people in work are hard to find. And he is standing out for the right reasons. And within 3 years, Jose is company president. Bear in mind, 3 years is a very short amount of time to basically be noted as somebody who's effective at your job and to just go all the way through the ranks and to arrive at company president. Some people will say, Well, that is just because he has the acumen and the capability and capacity to thrive. And of course, it goes without saying that that would be part of it. But also, be aware that there are certain mindsets and certain characteristics personality-wise which can be pretty antisocial that can arrive in those positions too. Because we in the Western world reward quite negative traits in the corporate world. People who are cutthroat, people who will stand on anybody else to get ahead. I'm not saying that that was the case. I'm saying that it's really important to acknowledge that those kind of mindsets, characteristics, and personality traits exist in very successful people a lot of the time. And when he gets to 35 years of age, Jose becomes the executive vice president of US operations for the car rental company Hertz, which is still going. We all know Hertz rental cars. And he actually employed O.J. Simpson to do one of its most infamous adverts. And we all know who O.J. Simpson is. I haven't done that case yet. I will get around to it. But let me just say, again, it will be one as long as this. So the reason I haven't is I have to think about how much time I can invest to really dedicating myself to such a deep dive. But we all know why O.J. Simpson is an infamous name in all of our minds. Now, Hertz, it was actually a subsidiary of RCA. That's Radio Corporation of America. 1 year later, RCA transferred Jose to its records division, and he was then named Chief Operating Officer. So he's just doing incredibly well. And John Mason, he was an entertainment attorney. He was also a friend of Jose. He said that Jose's attitude was, I'm a winner. I'm going to take this dog company and I'm going to make it number one. So obviously he's looking at this company that isn't thriving and he's thinking to himself, this is my challenge. I'm going to take it from where it is and I'm going to just absolutely amplify it through the ranks. So he's got a genuine confidence about his skills. Now, with respect to Jose, he did expand that company's Latin music catalogue. He also signed really notable bands. So Duran Duran, which is a British band. I have seen Duran Duran. I am showing my age when I say that. Eurythmics, I mean, iconic band from the UK. And also Menudo. So he had a really good taste for what was going to be successful. And it was successful. Now, he ends up moving to LA because in 1986, Jose basically clashes with a senior executive at RCA. And the reason for that is he gets passed over for the executive vice presidency of RCA Records. And you can imagine somebody who has climbed so quickly, stratospherically to some degree, he's not going to be happy not getting the job he wants. And he takes such umbrage with this that he literally uproots his family. And bear in mind, Kitty, his wife, is really distressed by this because she loves her life. She loves a house in Princeton. She wants to stay there. She's raising her kids. Everything's going well. And Jose is like, no, it's not happening. I have been slighted. So I am going to literally take you to another place and start again to prove these individuals that they've made a mistake. And that, I would say, is the main motivation. And that's why they end up moving to Los Angeles. Now here, Jose moved to IVE. That's International Video Entertainment. That was a video distributor, and that eventually became Live Entertainment. Now, Live Entertainment's a division of this hugely successful Carolco Pictures. If you think about the company that produced Sylvester Stallone's Rambo films, which were staggeringly successful, and also some of Arnold Schwarzenegger's action films. So we're talking action-based, big hitters and massively profitable. Now in 1986, that company had lost $20 million. Now under a year later, after Menendez moved there, Live earned $8 million in profit. In 1988, they doubled that. So he goes and he takes a failing company and he doesn't just put it into the situation where it's in the black again. He absolutely exceeds all expectations and makes it highly profitable. A colleague of his said he was literally the perfect corporate executive. He had this incredible dedication to business. He was focused. He was really specific about what he wanted from the business. He was really in control. And he basically believed that whatever had to be done should be done with no heart if necessary. Now that really speaks to me. If you consider that the belief is that 20% of individuals in senior corporate positions are meeting the psychopathy bar, it sounds to me that people revered Jose in many ways as a businessman, that he was awesome at what he did, But the cost of that was being cold and calculating. He'd get the job done. And if you were in the way of getting the job done, well, potentially you wouldn't be very much in that job that you were standing in the way of his progress for very much longer. He sounds like somebody who is able to manage stress in a different way to a lot of us, and also manage decision making in a way that many of us might find discompassionate, we could say. Now, the family first lived in Calabasas, which is like this really upper middle class suburb of Los Angeles, near Malibu, in fact. And there they lived in one house. But the reason they're living in this specific house is because they're building this unbelievably spectacular house, and they're just waiting for that to be created. And that house that was being built, it was on 13 acres of land, and it had this mountaintop views, which is just amazing. Then they moved to Beverly Hills. At this point, Jose buys a 6-bedroom Mediterranean style house, you would say, and that was located on a really illustrious area of Elm Drive. Now, that house had a red tile roof, it had a courtyard, there was a swimming pool, there was a tennis court, it had a guest house. Now, that house had been built in 1927, but then they rebuilt it in 1974. And it had been very much built to purpose for the privileged. It had everything that you would want if you happen to have a very big income, like the trappings of leisure, and just be able to entertain. It was one of those perfect spaces. And actually, it had previously been rented to Elton John, Prince, Hal Prince, and even a Saudi prince. And the rental cost back then was $35,000 a month. So bear in mind, $35,000 a month today would be just over $100,000, which is an extortionate amount of money. Now, bear in mind, Jose and Kitty, they're doing well. They've accumulated a really substantial amount of wealth. It actually exceeded $14 million in 1989. That is eye-watering in today's value, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure that all of us in this moment are thinking, what would I feel like if I had $14 million in the bank? You know, I don't think I'd worry that much in my life. They also had several properties, so they've got a portfolio. Again, if you're talking about that in today's age, that would equate to $36.8 million. So they're not shy of a penny, shall we say. Now, Erik Menendez, he transferred from Calabasas High to Beverly Hills High at this point. Lyle was actually a student at Princeton University. I guess what is noted here is that they had to some degree fulfilled Jose's American dream. And from the outside, they genuinely seemed like the ideal family. But guys, how often do we talk about the outside compared to the inside? It can just look beautiful, seem beautiful, have the price tag of incredible. Every privilege is afforded and the postcode is the right postcode. But when it comes down to what's actually happening behind closed doors, it's just a whole different world. So John Mason, who knew them, he said this family were just extraordinarily close-knit. From the outside looking in, it was one big, happy family. Apparently they did things together, they telephoned each other multiple times a day. One of the things that they did most of the time was they'd have dinner together. And I think we can all agree that that is something that we imagine intimate families to do. It's something that I suggest on a psychological level when I've worked in parenting and helping people, shall we say, from problematic backgrounds, try to unite and become more of a symbol of connectedness. The dinner table is where I begin, because when you share space, when you eat together, when you converse together, when you're sat chatting away, it really makes a difference to your intimacy. And they just did that on a daily level. Now, a lot of people who lived in Beverly Hills at the time, they were more into the social scene. So a lot of them would leave their children as they got older by themselves around dinner time so that they could go out and socialize with their friends. But that wasn't the case in this family. Now, on the day, this is just the day before the murders, the family actually chartered a boat called Motion Picture Marine. It was in Marina del Rey, and apparently they spent the day shark fishing, which is my worst nightmare. If you were like, Emma, what would you like to do for a day out? I don't know, I'd just like to go for a picnic, or maybe an Italian. I'm very partial to an Italian. I was thinking something a bit more extreme. Bungee jumping, I've done that and it really hurt my back, although it was quite a lot of fun. Now, Are we thinking about maybe going climbing up a mountain, although not really steep ones because I have literally no upper body strength? No! Are you thinking about something that, I don't know, I'll find exciting? Probably not. I'm thinking about shark fishing. Like, never, never. One, sharks terrify me. I'm not afraid of a lot of things, but whenever I'm going on holiday, I Google shark attacks. I literally do that. I'm so embarrassed to admit that. I lived in Australia. In Darwin, you can't go in the sea because a crocodile or a shark will eat you or a jellyfish will kill you. Even when I was at Bondi, not chancing it, mate. Dip my toes in. That'll do. Shark fishing, not for me. Anyway, that's what happened before the murders. Now, on the evening of Sunday, 20th of August, this is 1989, Jose and Kitty just basically watching TV. They're in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion. Lyle and Erik at this point are apparently at the cinema, and a neighbour reports hearing what they said was like a firework-like noise coming from the house around 10 p.m. But they just didn't take that much further notice because at the end of the day, I suppose people do let off fireworks. It's also interesting to me that guns are legal in America, as we all know, and that neighbour thought it was more likely to be fireworks. So I think instantly we can envisage that the area itself very safe, and they weren't expecting that it would be gunfire. Whereas I think if you were in a different area of America where there was more of a criminal issue, you may think, oh my God, they are gunshots. But it's testament to the safety of that environment that doesn't even cross their mind. Now, bear in mind, Lyle and Erik have been apparently to see Batman at the cinema. They then enter the house by the front door, and to their apparent horror, they find their parents dead. So they're apparently sprawled on the floor and the sofa in the den. So Lyle at this point, understandably, calls 911, is absolutely hysterical. He's shouting, "They shot and killed my parents." And then another neighbour who was interviewed on the television after the murder said she'd actually seen one of the Menendez boys just curled up in a ball in the front garden, and he was apparently screaming in grief at that moment in time.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Somebody killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Somebody killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, kill.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response, 722 North Elmore, Park.
What happened?
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get things further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who?
I don't know anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
Mom and Dad. You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting. Get away from them.
Okay. Hey, let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
The police arrive. This is a really nice neighbourhood. So this is not what they're expecting. This is not a normal call out. In fact, the police who arrived said it was brutal beyond measure. They were horrified, and these were dyed-in-the-wool police officers and investigators. Jose was shot 6 times, including a fatal shot to the back of the head. Now, Kitty, she was shot 10 times in total, and the fatal shot that she encountered was to her cheek. Apparently, that was when she was on the ground just crawling away, which is a harrowing image to present because she must have been cogent and present in that moment when the person came up to her and basically blew her head off at that point. Now, Beverly Hills Police Chief, a guy called Marvin Lanone, he said, "I've heard of very few murders that were more savage." And what I've just described clearly, incredibly savage, absolute overkill. It's kind of what you see in the movies, isn't it? When somebody comes in with a shotgun, for example, just blows the person away 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. You don't need to do that. And I think that whenever we see that level of overkill, we imagine a level of rage directed towards those individuals. There is something about a relationship there that has compelled the individual or individuals to massacre and execute those people. I think that mob killings often represent them, and I think also intimate relationship killings can mirror it as well. Now, Dan Stewart, he's a retired police detective. He was hired by the family to basically investigate the murders. They wanted to know, who's done this? Why have they done this? Because clearly family members are going to be scared that there could be some retribution towards them as well. And he starts investigating the murders and actually gave a really graphic description. He said, I've seen a lot of homicides, but nothing that brutal. Blood, flesh, skulls. It would be hard to describe, especially Jose, as resembling a human that you would recognize. So clearly, they've been blown to pieces. Now, according to the autopsy report, one shot caused explosive decapitation with evisceration of the brain and deformity of the face to Jose. So we're talking about his head just being blown off, essentially. The first round of shots apparently struck Kitty in her chest, in her right arm, her left hip, and her left leg. Her murderers then reloaded and fired her into the face. That caused multiple lacerations to the brain, and it was described as being, when it came down to her face, an unrecognisable pulp. So they have been decimated as human beings. Now, one of the things that was obvious from the get-go was there were no shell cases found at the crime scene, so the perpetrator must have gone around and picked up the 14 shells, and the belief was that they must have almost certainly worn rubber gloves, so there was a level of forensic sophistication in that moment. The police obviously are going to conduct interviews around the area, and also with Lyle and Erik Menendez. They're, of course, the people who found their parents in that brutally murdered state. So it was around 4 a.m. the following day that conversation begins. Erik Menendez, he's 18 at this moment in time, tells the detective that one of the things that he saw when he walked into the room was that there was smoke and that the den itself smelled of gunpowder. Now, the interviewing officer rightfully says, well, how do you know the smell of gunpowder? Because apparently Erik Menendez had said he'd never shot a gun before. But Erik Menendez said, well, I just assumed. Neither of the brothers at this moment in time were thought of as a suspect. They were treated really nicely by the Beverly Hills Police Department. I mean, people were devastated for them. These are two young boys whose parents have literally been obliterated in their own home whilst they were just at the cinema. So of course, everybody's extending absolute sympathy and empathy. One of the things that they failed to do as investigators at that moment in time was they didn't perform gunpowder residue tests on either brother. They also didn't search their cars, but ultimately the reasoning behind that is they believe that the brothers are victims too at this moment in time. Now, the prevalent theory at the time of these killings was that the Menendez murders had actually been a mob hit. And the reason for that is it was just so unbelievably violent. Erik Menendez actually pointed the finger at Noel Bloom. Now, Noel Bloom was actually a distributor of pornographic films. He was also a former associate of the Bonanno organised crime family. So he's pointing at him as a possible suspect. And Erik told police and reporters that Bloom and his father had basically despised each other. There'd been this business deal between them. It had turned sour. So Bloom's then understandably brought in for questioning, but he just denies any involvement. The brothers at this point basically say to investigators and also to the company that the father was working for that they're really scared. They think, look, this is a mob hit. Maybe the mob's after them too. And so the brothers don't go home. They start moving from hotel to hotel after the murders. Interestingly enough, a woman called Marlene Mizzi, so she was the front desk supervisor at the Beverly Hills Hotel. She said that Lyle arrived at the hotel, this is without reservation, 2 days after the murders, and he asked for a 2-bedroom suite. She showed him the suites. He didn't like them that much. They were the only suites that were actually available at short notice, so he decided he didn't want to stay. He went to another hotel. Clearly, we can all agree that the Beverly Hills suites will have been nice in that hotel, but clearly they had, shall we say, aspirations for even more beautiful decor and surroundings. And it also means that they're not really concerned about spending at this moment in time. They clearly feel able to afford nice hotels. Also, it does bring in the mindset of grief because, with respect, if my parents had both been murdered in such a brutal way, I probably wouldn't be thinking about whether the 2-bedroom suite in the Beverly Hills Hotel was good enough for me. I'd probably just want to get my head down and hide away. I'd actually probably want to be with family members who could support me through such a horrible ordeal, but everybody is different, each to their own. Now, Jose's company, Live Entertainment, they actually footed the $8,000 bill when the brothers began living at the Bel Air Hotel. They also funded limousines, they funded bodyguards for them both. So bear in mind, that company is caring deeply about what has happened to one of their much loved, cared for members of the company who's now dead, but also they feel that the boys are their responsibility in that moment in time, dealing with such a horrific event in their lives where now they have no parents. And I guess people start to get a little bit weirded out by the way the Menendez brothers start acting very early on after their parents have lost their lives. Again, everyone reacts differently to stress. Everyone reacts differently to grief. I will appreciate there will be people listening to me now who've lost in the most traumatic of ways, and you will say to me, you know what, Emma, when it happened to me, I did fill up my credit card. I did get those dopamine hits going and buying shoes or getting a new car because I was so needing to disorientate myself and disconnect myself from what had actually happened. I just went ahead and did that. But for the most part, that's not how it works. Don't get me wrong, I can associate with that as well. When I cut my father down after his suicide, I went back to work 6 days later, literally, and it saved me. Everyone acts in a different way, so please don't feel I'm judging you when I start talking about how people look at the Menendez brothers' behavior after the deaths and question it. Because like I said, grief is subjective, we respond and react to it differently. But on the whole, we're not checking into really expensive hotels and going on spending sprees, but that's exactly what the brothers do. Now, the reason they've got access to money is Jose's personal life insurance policy of $650,000 has been made available to them. And they are being, what can I say, incredibly lavish in the way that they're indulging in a lifestyle. So Lyle, he buys a Porsche Carrera. We all know that a Porsche Carrera is a prestige vehicle. And back at the time when these guys are buying that car, it is extremely prestigious. They are the symbol of wealth, the symbol of youth, also the symbol of a midlife crisis when you get over 50. But nonetheless, they are the car that everybody would look at back in these times and think you have arrived. They also bought 3 Rolex watches the day before their parents' funeral. Again, somebody could look in and say, well, hey, maybe they wanted to look great on the parents' funeral. They wanted to be respectful. They wanted to carry through the prestige of the parents and the lifestyle that they'd had, and Rolex are a mark of that. Also, though, they bought Chuck's Spring Street Cafe. It's a buffalo wing restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey. So there's a lot of spending going on, and maybe a little bit of chaos within that, but they are young, aren't they? It's the first time they've probably had access to all of this money, and it doesn't necessarily need to make sense because they're operating without the acumen and experience of how you will act older with money, because the truth is you know how to be responsible by them. Erik also hired a full-time tennis coach for $60,000. He started then competing in tennis tournaments overseas, so they are going through this cash pretty quickly. Another thing that he did was rack up some huge gambling debts at this point. He lost thousands in gambling. They also invested $40,000 in a rock concert at the Palladium in Los Angeles, and it never happened. So they are being frivolous. They are being loud with their wealth, and people are looking from the outside in and thinking, this feels just a little bit weird. You know, where's the grief? Where's the loss? Where's the falling apart for a period of time? However, at the same time, everyone is looking at them and thinking, hey, these boys have had a lot of privilege, a lot of wealth, and they're also dealing with the horrific loss. So, of course, their behavior is going to be a little bit weird. Now, as opposed to going back to their Beverly Hills mansion, they basically left it unoccupied. So they hadn't sold it, but they didn't return there. But bear in mind, if your parents have been brutally murdered in the den in that place, you're not really going to want to go there. I mean, there were stains still in the rooms where their brain matter and blood had landed. So in the end, they choose to live in adjoining condos in Marina del Rey. And I think it's very obvious to everybody listening to this, they are incredibly close. So these brothers are very loving brothers. They care deeply for each other. They are invested in each other without a doubt. It is not fake. They are truly good friends and they truly are protective of one another's well-being. People start noticing that whilst they're living close by, they're also going out and dining extravagantly. They're taking these lavish overseas trips to the Caribbean and London. Actually, at one point, they attended a New York Knicks basketball game and they became immortalised when they appeared courtside in the background of a Mark Jackson trading card. Now, eBay has since prohibited anyone selling that card on their website, which is weird because eBay sell a lot of weird stuff with respect. But hey, it's incredible, isn't it, how these big tech organisations decide what's right and what's wrong, isn't it? Oh, it drives me a little bit insane, that stuff. But apparently eBay were like, nope, that cannot be sold here because it's got them on it. Now, within 6 months, their total spending approached $700,000, which is heavy going, right? I mean, $700,000 now in 6 months is a ton of money. But back then, you're talking about it being around the equivalent of 3 million quid in 6 months. People are thinking, oh, this is strange. This is odd. The public are looking in and saying it just does not feel contextual on an emotional level, the way they're acting. But also the police. The police are starting to get deeply suspicious and they actually start to build a case against them. Now, the reason that they're suspicious of Lyle and Erik is because essentially the mob theory falls through. They don't feel that there's any connection at all to mobsters coming in and murdering the parents. And the other thing they're thinking is, listen, if there's one thing we can see from the way the boys are behaving is there's a clear financial motive. These spending habits are indicative of people who really enjoy having the cash. And the only reason they've got the cash is because 2 people were executed. Now, the police relied on one of Erik's best friends, a guy called Craig Signorelli. So Craig actually offered to help the police. He told the police, Erik's actually confessed to me that he's murdered his parents. He also revealed that Erik had previously written a 66-page screenplay titled Friends. Now, that screenplay depicts a son killing his wealthy parents for their inheritance, which does feel a little bit similar to what potentially the police believe have happened. And I guess from the outside looking in, we can also apply that to individuals who have gone ahead and murdered people, and then the police have uncovered lots of journals where they're indicating it's going to happen or they've written about it afterwards. Sometimes that mindset of a killer is so that they actually want to talk about it. Often they don't feel they're able to talk about it, so they find a way of using things like journals or writing to do just that. So I suppose we could draw a parallel from other criminals who've done similar. Equally, it can be that when you're dealing with feelings where you feel really unhappy about your life, or you're really trapped, or you're really angry with people, that venting and placing it into a creative art form, such as writing a screenplay, could actually work in a cathartic way. So I don't think it's a direct relationship that I wrote this thing about an idea of killing my family because I was going to kill my family. I'm not saying that wasn't something that might have, shall we say, prompted further thoughts about doing that. I'm saying I just don't think we can say, well, that evidences they were definitely planning it. Now, in attempt to get a confession, the police arranged for Craig to wear a wire. This is during a lunch with Erik. Craig just directly asks Erik whether he killed his parents during that dinner, and Erik denies it. So the police do not get their evidence in that moment. But this is where Dr. Jerome Oziel comes in. So Dr. L. Jerome Oziel's a Beverly Hills psychologist. This is at the time of the Menendez murders. Now, he apparently was an expert in phobias of various sorts, but the majority of his professional articles tend to have dealt with sex-related disorders. Now, he was first hired for Erik, and he was hired by Kitty and Jose after Erik and Lyle were, wait for it, caught burglarizing 2 homes in Calabasas. this is one of the reasons why they actually moved to Beverly Hills. So I think it's important that we note that Erik and Lyle had been naughty boys, shall we say. I mean, I don't know about you. I've got two sons who are late teenager and early 20s, and they aren't out there robbing me neighbours. Never had to worry about it. Never even gave it a thought, just not their mindset. Actually, I know a lot of young men. None of them have done it. At the end of the day, it is pretty weird that the Menendez brothers were like, hey, you know what we should do? We should go and burglarise some homes around here, particularly when they weren't short of a bob or two. I suppose we can say, therefore, is there a desire for some kind of adrenaline? And also, do they get the same emotional feedback that you or I would do? Because most of us would never even consider or contemplate going and robbing homes in our area that we live. Firstly, because it criminalises us if we're caught. And secondly, because it's just morally abandoning who we are. But they did that. So basically, this is why this particular psychologist is brought in. Now, Lyle later said that Jose only got Dr. Aziel because he, as a psychologist, was willing to break patient confidentiality and tell Jose what was being said by his son. And that is an abandonment, absolutely, of that practitioner's code. As somebody who is very well qualified in psychology and in therapy, I have to abide by the rules and regulations set out by my awarding body. And one of those things is I do not break confidentiality. Now, there are things that can make you make a choice to do that, such as if you are a young person, you're at risk to yourself, you're at risk to others. Because understandably, under the age of 18, I am going to break that confidentiality to protect you. Also, if you're sat in my room and you say, I'm just about to go murder my mother, I'm not going to let that go. I'm going to act up on it to protect you and to protect them. So there are reasons why you would breach and break confidentiality, but under no circumstances would you ever see a client and then tell another human being what has been said just because they want you to tell them. It breaches confidentiality. It absolutely means that you can be struck off, and rightly so. It breaks trust and can ruin a client's life. The very fact that Jose has actually brought this doctor in so that they are told about what the kids are saying, that is an absolute travesty. And it means that Jose is very dominant, very domineering, and doesn't respect the values and boundaries that his children should be entitled to. Now, 2 months after the murders, Erik, who's obviously had interaction with Dr. Aziel, he leaves what could only be described as a relatively concerning message. And the pair at this point have a follow-up therapy session. That's on the 31st of October. Now, Erik requested at that moment in time that they don't stay in the office. In fact, he wanted him and the doctor to go for a walk. He didn't want to meet in the office. He was feeling really agitated. He was feeling anxious. He was feeling depressed. So understandably, just sitting in a chair opposite somebody can be a bit intimidating when you're going through a lot of these feelings. Going for a walk can actually be really helpful. Side-by-side communication is very effective, particularly when dealing with conflictual and challenging areas in your life and emotionally. Now, during their walk, Erik tells Aziel basically that his father's a great man and that he wants to write a book about him. They walk back to the office, and before they enter, Erik tells Aziel, we did it. So suddenly, you can imagine just the air in the room just becoming a vacuum and the silence arriving in that moment, the breathtaking reality of what's been stated. Erik's admitted, we did it. Erik then went on to describe in detail a plan to kill their parents and when it started. He said that they'd seen a BBC programme, and in that programme, someone had killed their father. And during that programme, the reasoning behind it was because the father was tyrannical, was dominating, and was controlling. And that's exactly, as far as he was concerned and his brother were concerned, how Jose was. And clearly, that negates reasoning as to why they killed Kitty. Because, if Jose's all those things, fair enough, it's awful. You don't go ahead and kill somebody for those reasons. But nonetheless, Kitty, she's none of those things, or at least not to the degree that Jose is, so why kill her? But he explained that she had to die because she wouldn't have been able to live without her husband. It's interesting, isn't it, when people use those excuses? Think about Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer. He is a classic example of that. He blasts his grandma's brains out, then waits for his grandfather to come home. Not because he's angry with his grandfather, but he's just like, you know what? I don't want my grandfather to realise that grandma's dead. He'll be really upset and she won't be happy without her, so I'll kill him too. Like, if you ask the majority of human beings, would you like to die? I've killed your partner. Would you like to die too? The resounding answer is going to be, no thanks. I just would like to carry on with my life because it's my life. But that's the reasoning. Now, obviously, Lyle finds out about these sessions and he starts joining the sessions. And in the end, the two confess on a December tape, in fact, so it's being taped, that they killed their mother to put her out of her misery. And they added that the father just deserved to die. He had apparently participated in infidelity, and that was one of the reasons why she was so miserable. Very loose reasons as to why you would kill your parents in such a gratuitous manner. Now, Aziel tapes Erik's multiple confessions on the 31st of October, the 2nd of November, and also the 11th of December. So that's very incriminating, because clearly that doctor has now got evidence verbatim from these individuals that they were involved in the killings. Now, at the time of those recordings, Dr. Aziel was married to his wife, Laura. But interesting that a lot of his work was around sex stuff, because he was, shall we say, not very faithful. He's having an affair with Judalon Smith. Now, Smith alleged that she was in Dr. Aziel's office on the 31st of October. She said that she was standing outside the door and that she was listening in as Erik confessed to the murders. Now, Aziel actually denied that Smith was there that day, said that she was around the office, but she wasn't actually in it. So he was saying that she wasn't telling the truth. Smith said that Aziel felt he had to tape their confessions for her and his protection. Apparently, he was scared that the boys would kill him. Now he knew the secret, and I can understand that. I mean, with respect, I think that Aziel is very unprofessional, but I think that if I was taking time to sit with two young men who had literally murdered their parents in a horrific way and had a lot of money, and I knew things that could send them to prison potentially forever, I would be a little bit scared. So that makes sense to me. And Aziel was also concerned, and he actually did go ahead, as noted, on the 11th of December and got the brothers' confession on tape. So he has it now on tape, absolutely, that they have confessed to the murders. Now, in March 1990, Aziel and Smith break up, so their affair ends. And the 4th of March, that same year, Smith goes to the police, and she actually tells them that Lyle and Erik have confessed to their therapist, and also tells them of the existence of the audio tapes at Dr. Aziel's office. She also, at this point, tells the police that the boys had threatened to kill Aziel if he reported them. Additionally, she's able to tell them about two 12-gauge shotguns that had been purchased by the Menendez brothers at a sporting goods store in San Diego. So come on, that information is just going to be a red rag to a bull for the police. She is very well informed, and certainly they're going to act on that information. All of that, of course, was unknown to the Beverly Hills police after an entire 7 months of investigation. So she has just come up with the goods in the biggest way possible. Officers then go ahead and track down the gun shop in San Diego. And they find out, indeed, Lyle had bought the two shotguns and he'd actually used his college roommate's ID. They'd stolen it. These boys, with respect, they're a little bit niffed at the old light fingers stuff, aren't they? I mean, robbing neighbours and nicking IDs. So we're certainly not going to say that these young men have abided by the rules and regulations of society. They certainly are a little off-centre when it comes down to their morals and ethics. Now, at this point, the police also obtain a subpoena, and that subpoena is to search Aziel's properties. They then find the tapes that have been recorded through those sessions. They were found in a safe deposit box in a bank on Ventura Boulevard. So on the 8th of March 1990, the Menendez brothers' lives start to finally unravel. Lyle's flagged down by more than a dozen heavily armed policemen. He's leaving the Beverly Hills house at that point, and it was a complete surprise to Lyle. He'd actually been playing chess until 2 a.m. the night before at the home of a friend in Beverly Hills, so he did not see it coming at all. His arrest was reported almost immediately to Los Angeles news outlets. It just blew up. And as that happened, Erik wasn't even in America. He was actually playing a tennis tournament in Israel, and he reportedly became absolutely hysterical when he found out that his brother had been arrested. I suppose you know that your whole world is caving in at that moment. And Erik's concern then became mainly leaving Israel before he was arrested there. So he flew to Miami, and an aunt of his there who he visited actually said, listen, you need to go back to LA. You need to turn yourself in. You cannot go on the run. And so on the 11th of March 1990, Erik notified police of his travel plans and did indeed give himself up at Los Angeles International Airport. He was arrested there by 4 detectives. At this point, he was booked at the Los Angeles County Men's Central Jail, of course, on suspicion of murder. At that point, he was held without bond. Now, the Menendez brothers spent 3 years in the Los Angeles County Men's Jail just waiting for their trials to begin. And during that period of time, they were completely segregated from the other prisoners. They were housed in separate cells in the jail's 7,000 section. They had actually housed in that section really high-profile inmates like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, also the infamous O.J. Simpson, who ironically had been in that Hertz advert that kind of weirdly connects them all together. Now, during the first months of confinement, Erik was actually suicidal and he was given Xanax. I'm sure a lot of you in the States will know exactly what Xanax is because it's a drug that's often given out to people who have severe anxiety and insomnia. It's not necessarily that popular in the UK. It can have really high-level rebound effects, which means that if you take it for anxiety, it's dead effective. It makes you feel so chill and better, but then the minute you come off it, it's like insanely horrific. So it has the positives and negatives to that particular prescription, but it shows that Erik really was in a bad place. And a priest visited Erik during that time, and it's through that connection that Erik starts to talk about traumas. And these traumas are things that he suffered during his childhood. Now, that beginning to discuss what he was saying had occurred in childhood essentially lays the foundation for the brothers' what some consider controversial defense. And we're going to unpick that down the line. We get to June 1990. Erik, at this point, is having weekly therapy sessions with Dr. William Vickery. Dr. William Vickery is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist. Again, if you don't know America and you don't know the educational establishments, it's a really good place. So Dr. William Vickery is going to be a very well-respected psychiatrist. Harvard-trained means, top level. But it shows that this man is struggling. And he's struggling enough for the prison system to afford him the opportunity to speak, to get some help. And even though I am not going to today say that somebody is guilty or innocent, or if things happened or didn't happen, my job is to explore the pen portrait possibility that leads to a situation. And I genuinely think that a prison system is going to look at certain individuals and consider whether they are appropriate to have help. And also, if it's a regular occurrence, that person is going to be filling that space and place because they have things to talk about. Therapy is not an easy experience. Lots of you will have had it. It can be very affronting, very challenging, very traumatizing. It can be all of those things on the way to healing. And the fact that he's having these regular sessions does suggest that there was something very heavy that he was managing. Now, the gap between the arrests of Lyle and Erik and their actual first trial was about 18 months. The state and their defense attorneys, they basically had this big battle. And the battle was whether the recordings Aziel made could actually be used in the trial. So the defendants, they said those tapes are privileged patient-therapist communication and therefore they are protected from disclosure. Now that wouldn't happen in the UK. In the UK, those tapes would be subpoenaed and handed over. I've had my own notes subpoenaed in the UK and handed over. It's one of the reasons why my notes were always handwritten, because when they get subpoenaed, well, good luck to you, because you're not going to be able to understand the majority of what I write, because I write it in a particular shorthand that I understand. And also my writing is all but illegible because I'm highly dyslexic. But hey, I can read it really well. But in America, obviously, there is this privilege that at least has to be discussed when we get to cases like this. Now, in August 1990, Judge James Albrecht ruled that the tapes were actually admissible evidence. And you can imagine the prosecution are just absolutely thrilled with that because they feel that's a bang to rights reality. You know, you've got these guys confessing that they have murdered their parents. Now, the reason that the judge agreed that is because apparently Aziel had claimed that Lyle had threatened him, and that therefore violated the doctor-patient privilege. Now, Albrecht's ruling was actually appealed, and that meant that the proceedings were delayed for a further 2 years. And you can completely understand that, because if you are the defence, you're going to be like, I don't want these tapes brought into court for a jury to hear, which is basically them confessing to their crimes, and other stuff that might be talked about that could really implicate them and go against any positive defence. Equally, the prosecution are going to be like, damn straight we're getting those in here, because they will think it's case closed in that situation. We get to August 1992. At this point, the Supreme Court of California, they ruled that most of the tapes were actually admissible, but the exception was that the tape on which Erik discussed the murders was not admissible. We get to 1992, the December of that year. At this point, a Los Angeles County grand jury issued indictments. The brothers at this point were charged with the murders of their parents, charges with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances for lying in wait. And that means premeditation. And that made them eligible for the death penalty. So this is a big case. They are looking potentially at being put to death. Now, the first trial, that begins between 1993 and 1994, that trial's held at the Los Angeles County Superior Court at the San Fernando Valley Government Center in Van Nuys. The judge was Stanley Weisberg. They presided over the trial. Now, in 1992, that judge had presided over the first Rodney King trial. Bear in mind, that Rodney King trial resulted in the deadly Los Angeles riots after 4 LAPD officers were acquitted, and it was a travesty. It was a travesty. So, you know, this individual's got some form. So this judge, I would say, has got some notoriety for all the wrong reasons. So on the 14th of May 1993, Judge Weisberg rules that Lyle and Erik Menendez are going to be tried together. And the reason for that kind of makes sense if it was in the interest of time and cost and convenience, because the crime had played out in the same point. They were brothers, they planned it together and so on and so forth. So why not just do it at the same time? Weisberg saw that there'd be an absolute complete duplication of witnesses and arguments if those separate trials were held. So even though they were tried at the same time, they still brought in a separate jury. Now, Lyle's defence was run by Jill Lansing. The prosecutor was Pam Bosnick. She didn't like them. I'm just going to say that from the get-go. Pam really didn't like the Menendez brothers from the get-go. I know a prosecutor has got a job to do, but Pam really didn't like them. Like, she had a venom for the brothers, and I appreciate venom because I am somebody who can spit it in certain cases, but sometimes I think it's really important, even as a prosecutor, to remember your position, which is to fight a case and to try to have an emotional investment in it, but not one that just makes you look like you're a bit bitter, which she definitely did. Erik's defense, run by Leslie Abramson, they were considered one of the best defense lawyers in LA for death row cases, and the prosecution for Erik was Lester Kuriyama. And again, Kuriyama had a deep and emotional hostility towards the brothers, without a doubt. So the prosecution feels like it's gunning for the brothers on a personal level, shall we say. And I guess that part of that will come down to the fact that these are 2 young men who, from the outside looking in, had everything. They had privilege, they had a postcode that was amazing because their home was incredible, in a safe space and safe place. They had every opportunity to become thriving members of our society, and they blew it. They killed their parents, as far as the prosecution are concerned, in absolute cold blood. So affording them any understanding, any respect is something that would have been challenging, and that definitely came across during trying both of the brothers. Now, Abramson and Lansing, they actually consulted with Paul Mones. He's a lawyer and a children's rights advocate, and that individual wrote When a Child Kills, abused children who kill their parents, so basically who take part in parricide. Now, Mon's book is based on research, and that research evidences that children who kill their parents are usually peaceful and have parents who are very private and secretive. And Moan's actually found that the children who tend to not be problematic until they kill, they have a very low self-esteem and they build up to the killing. They suffer abuse silently. Usually they've had lots of years of trying their best to please their parents and being denied that privilege of pride and care. And when they fight back, they do it when their abuser is in a vulnerable state. The crimes tend to be characterized by overkill. So, for example, instead of shooting somebody once, you'll shoot them several times. And this particular person believed that when a parent's murdered, it's their fault. So basically, the victim feels like that parent deserves it. They have done all of these horrible things to me. I have sat there, I have tried, I have been the best I can be, and it's never been good enough. And finally, I am going to kill them because they deserve it. I have no other way out. That's the mindset that came across in this particular book and the research that was done within it. Okay, my lovelies, that is the end of episode 1. As you know, there are another 2 episodes, so make sure that you watch those too.